Welcome to Pre-COVID Home Advantage in Volleyball, a multidimensional analysis. My name is John Foreman. I'll be the presenter. My co-author on this is Dr. Edward Hope, who's a lecturer at the University of Essex. Our motivation for this is actually the dearth of serious study of volleyball in the context of home advantage. Home advantage itself is well documented in sports, but mainly the focus there has been on invasion type of sports. And by that I mean American football, soccer, basketball, rugby. Volleyball obviously is not that sort of sport, and perhaps as a result has not gained as much attention, even though it is a widely popular sport in the world with, I believe the last numbers I saw was an estimated 900 million participants globally. So we wanted to take a look at what's out there and look to expand upon the literature that's been developed so far, which for the most part has been pretty small scale in scope. So, for example, we start off with Marcelino et al. In 2009 as kind of the seminal analysis in this space, and they focus on the international men's game, studying 275 sets, and find a home win rate of about 58%. Gomez et al. Is kind of the next in line, but volleyball is part of a multi-sport study in Spain, and interestingly, they did find that volleyball does have obviously a clear home advantage, but it's the lowest among the sports they looked at about 56%. Rugby was on the other end of the spectrum as the highest at 67%. Alexandros et al. In 2012 took a look at the Greek and Italian leagues, both men and women, and they found essentially the same result for both at about 58% home win rate. Campos et al. A couple years later looked at the Italian leagues again, but also mixed in the Brazilian leagues and found pretty similar results. Certainly the Italian figures are consistent. The Brazilian were slightly lower at 56%. Now, more recently, Yu et al. In 2020 took a look at the Chinese Women's League, which is obviously a small scope in terms of coverage, but they introduced the element of comparative team strength in that they split teams top half and bottom half. It was done primarily, as I understand it, based on practitioner examination of the teams. So subjectively, you could say. Now, that's all dealing with match level considerations. There are also mixed into this and also separately some analysis looking at the set level because volleyball is primarily played in a best 3 out of 5 format. But the findings are really mixed in that there is some contradiction between the different papers. So that's one of the things that we're looking to address here. To that end, we've collected a pretty broad data set. The data comes from 23 countries, mostly European, because that is where there's a highest concentration of leagues with the data we could get access to. But we also include Australia, Brazil, and the USA to give us some more geographic breadth. There's 11,649 total matches in the data set. We divided them categorically amongst professional, semi-professional, and amateur, and that's basically comes down to, are your team members getting paid to be just volleyball players? Are some of your team members getting paid to be volleyball players, but others not? Or is nobody really getting paid to be a volleyball player? The data is roughly equally split between female and male teams. So in terms of the methods, mentioned the Yu et al. 2020 paper and how they derived team strength. We wanted to pursue that and take that a step further, introduce a little bit more granularity and also a little bit more objectivity to it. So we went in two ways. First, the ranking system that we used was entirely based on the results of a team had in that season. So we took the team's win rate, so their win percent in the league for that season, ranked the teams top to bottom, and then we split them into on a tercile basis, so top, middle, and bottom third. So that became our team strength classification. We then applied proportionality z-tests for the kind of the categorical level analysis by competition, the competition level. So that's the pro, semi-pro, pro, and amateur, the team sex, and also team strength. And there's also the element of nation in there, so the country represented by the league. And then as a second tier of analysis, we did probit regressions using, as a kind of a starting point, this base model that you see here on the screen, which incorporates the home team rank and the away team rank as obviously major considerations toward who's going to win in any given match, all other factors aside. Excuse me, let me go back there. We also did this analysis using logit regressions. We publishing the results based on probit just because they are the more conservative of the results, although the findings hold. In terms of kind of the results at the match level with the general proportionality, we found an overall home win rate of about 56%. We do see the male rate at 1.2% higher, although the z-test does not come through as being significantly different there. So effectively, there's no differential. 15 of the 23 countries do show a home win rate significantly different than 50%. As you can see here, these are the top 5 countries. France being the leader, it's at basically 60%. Serbia not too far behind. There is clearly deviation at the country level. Now, some of it might be just a function that we've got more observations for certain countries than we have for others. So we can see even here that in the case of France, we have more than double the observations that we have of Greece. And we have other countries where we have even smaller numbers in Greece. So if we added additional data, there might be some more countries that become significant. We don't find any significant difference between the amateur, semi-professional, professional. The one thing I want to bring up is the proportionality based on the comparative team level. So the tercile breakdown that I mentioned before. The observation that the UNL came up with was if you're playing in the same relative level, then you have basically the same home advantage, or at least you can clearly demonstrate home advantage. So if we look at the top and the bottom bars here, so top third playing top third teams, bottom third playing bottom third teams, and also middle third playing middle third teams, you see clear home advantage. Now, when you look at when you've got a one-step separation, so when top third teams are playing middle third teams, and when middle third teams are playing bottom third teams, you still have clear home advantage. Now, obviously, in those cases, one team is a stronger team, so they are winning, call it about 80% of the time if you average out those two bars, which is what you would expect. But you, again, do have a clear differentiation between home and away percentages. Now, the place where we don't see a big difference is actually in the biggest split. And this you would probably expect based on what you would have found. In our case, though, while it's clear that the top tier teams are beating the bottom tier teams, sorry about that, more than 90% of the time, it's about a 2.3% difference between when they're home and when they're away. And that is statistically significant based on our proportionality tests. Moving ahead to the match regressions. If you look across the top, it's kind of our baseline. The intercept value is positive and significant across all the models, introducing all the factors that we have available to us, which tell us that at the base level, there is a home advantage. Using that first basic model of the formula that I laid out earlier, we can then look at the coefficients for when home teams are either away, are middle third or top third, versus when away teams are middle third or top third, because it's the lower tier, the bottom third teams that are both home and away, that are incorporated into the intercept value. So we can see here, and this kind of matches up with what I just showed you with the bars and the proportionality, when top third teams play against top third teams, there really isn't any difference from when bottom third teams are playing bottom third teams in terms of home advantage. You see that the positive coefficient for being at home is the same, is a mirror of the negative coefficient for when the top third team is away. We do see a slight additional home advantage in the case of middle third teams playing middle third, which is what we saw on the bar as well. Addition of the competitive levels doesn't bring up anything in terms of significance. So again, that backs up what we found in proportionality. When we add the sex consideration to it, that too doesn't show up as significant, at least initially, but it does in model 4 here, which is when we add another variable called season day, which basically is a counter of the number of days which have passed between the start of the season and the date of the match. So if the match is taking place 30 days from the beginning of the season for that league, then season day will be equivalent to 30. Now that doesn't load by itself. It's not significant, but its inclusion does alter slightly the sex coefficient for male teams, edges it up a little bit and gets it to the level of significance. So we do have an indication that male teams do have some advantage when it comes to playing at home relative to female teams in the same situation. But otherwise, we don't see any change in the regressions. Moving forward to the set level analysis, and just to back up, because I didn't include a slide on this to save on time, but basically the findings of the proportionality test was sets 1, 2, and 3 show home advantage. Sets 4 and 5 don't, which is not perhaps surprising in terms of the intuition, because if teams are even enough on a given day that they're reaching a fourth and especially a fifth set, then they're even enough to probably overcome home advantage. We do see that coming into play here as well. Again, we have a consistent baseline home advantage, and using essentially the same set of models, we can look at a fairly similar situation when we address teams of different competitive tiers. Set comes in, so that's set number 1, set number 2, etc. When that comes in, it is significant and it is negative, which is not surprising in the context of we expect less home advantage to no home advantage as we get into sets 4 and 5. So really, that's what that's factoring in. It's not that there's a reduction in home advantage necessarily in sets 1, 2, and 3. It's more picking it up later on, and that'll come back in the next slide, as you'll see. Once more, the competitive level of the teams doesn't factor in. No consideration there, or at least no differentiation there. Sorry about that. And then when we add in sex again, still no consideration. But once more, when we add season day in, we do find that male teams edge up enough that they are significantly stronger in home advantage than or their female counterparts. But otherwise, things are consistent across the board. Now, keeping in mind Model 5 here, we'll go on to the last analysis that we did, which takes that same model and but breaks the sample out into the various sets. So sets 1 through set 5, and applies that model to each subsample of the set. And so you can see across the bottom here, all matches are going to have minimum of 3 sets. So we can see the 11,649 matches with our full sample size. Roughly half of matches go to a 4th set, and call it about 20% of matches end up in a 5th set. So at the base level, the interesting observation straight off is we don't see a basic home advantage indication in the intercept in set 1. It's there in set 2 and 3, goes away again in set 4, and then is gone completely in set 5. The thing that stands out here in the set 1 is season day here is significant and positive, which suggests to us that home advantage actually, in the first set anyway, actually grows as the season progresses. We don't see it showing up as significant in any other set after that. So it might be just one of the theorized reasons for home advantages, travel fatigue and that sort of stuff. And maybe it's a case where travel fatigue accrues over the course of the season. And so we're seeing it play out in the first set in a way that it doesn't play out afterwards. Here we've got a bit narrower indication of differences in what happens when we look at teams of different tiers. So when home teams, the middle third teams are playing each other, There might be a slight additional home advantage, also similar when home teams or when top third teams are playing each other. But this changes considerably across the sets. So especially when you're out to set 5, if you take a look at middle third team is home and the way the middle third team is away, there's a 0.16 differential in those coefficients. So that's a considerable bump to the probability of the home team winning that fifth set. So that's an interesting observation, and it contrasts some of what we see in the prior literature, but not others. So we probably need a bit more work in this area to delve into that and firm up some of the findings. But that said, just to kind of highlight the takeaways from what we found here. So home advantage is clear in volleyball across all the categories that we've got available to us in the sample. Competitive level does not appear to influence home advantage. Male teams seem to exhibit more home advantage than do female teams. Middle tier teams seem to exhibit more home advantage, relatively speaking, to when bottom third teams or top third teams are playing each other. And home advantage tends to drop away in matches that go beyond 4 sets, although, as we just were pointing out, the considerations there can change when it comes to what level of competition or team strength, I should say, that we're talking about. So in terms of where we could take this analysis and places that would be interesting to delve into, one of the things that we can look at is samples that include more than just the top level of competition in a country. So in our set, we've only got Germany, where we've got something other than the top level, the top league there. Because there you've got the first Bundesliga, which is their top professional league, and you've got the second Bundesliga, which is more of a semi-professional league. So we've got both of those. But in all the other countries, the league that we have is their top league, including in the U.S., where we're using data from the NCAA, because there is no persistent professional level volleyball league in the U.S., at least currently. They're certainly in the works, but nothing readily available just yet. So we don't know if the lack of differentiation between the different, the amateur versus semi-pro versus pro has to do with actual differentiations between those levels not existing, or as a result of we're just not seeing a differentiation between the top level team in a country and other levels that would take place. Now, we did do kind of a basic analysis looking at the German data, and there doesn't seem to be any differentiation between the first and the second Bundesligas, but it's a small sample, it's a narrow set, so we don't want to call that conclusive at this stage. Another thing we would like to do is explore home advantage in matches between teams of different leagues. So all of our analysis here and the stuff that's been looked at in the prior literature is basically intra-league competition. But you've got things like Champions League and related inter-country competitions that take place. So it would be interesting to see what home advantage looks like in those situations. The hypothesis would be, because there's a lower level of familiarity, you would expect a higher level of home advantage. But that's worth taking a look at. Analysis of data inclusive of attendance figures for potential crowd size effects. This sample does not have that data, although a different sample that we've got hold of and are working on has some of that. So we're hoping that a future paper will bring that into consideration and give us a look at that. And finally, the thing that would be really interesting to potentially look at is what's going on intra-set. Are there different points in the set? For example, the first 5 points or the last 5 points of a close set, where home advantage plays a bigger part than it does otherwise. And maybe that ties in with the attendance side of things. So with that, I'll wrap it up and say thank you. The full paper, perhaps under a different title based on some of the feedback we received, is available under my profile on ResearchGate. And of course, you can always reach out to me for any questions, comments, observations, etc. at john.j
Thanks for your time and your consideration.